Hello, everyone. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1226th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Candida Alvarez and Carla Acevedo-Yates. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Candida Alvarez is widely regarded as one of her generation's most highly innovative and experimental painters. Her work has been collected by the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the Whitney Museum, el Museo del Barrio, among many others. She has been the recipient of numerous awards. Alvarez is an alum of Yale School of Art and held the F.H. Sellers Professorship in Painting at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she is now Professor Emeritus. In fall 2024, Alvarez was the Alex Katz Chair in Painting at the Cooper Union. She is represented by moniquemeloche in Chicago. And our host today, Carla Acevedo-Yates, born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, is a curator and researcher working across the Caribbean, Latin America, and the United States. She's the Marilyn and Larry Fields Curator and Director of Curatorial Initiatives at the MCA in Chicago, where exhibitions curated have included Forecast Form, Art in the Caribbean Diaspora from the 1990s to today, and Entre Horizontes, Art and Activism between Chicago and Puerto Rico. She was previously associate curator at the Broad Art Museum at MSU, where she curated various solo and group presentations, and she is the inaugural recipient of the CCS Bard Alumni Award. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Carla to get us started with immense gratitude to Carla and to Candida for today.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thanks to the entire team at the Brooklyn Rail for this invitation to be in conversation with Candida, who is not only an esteemed colleague and an artist that I've worked with, but also a personal friend, and actually the first artist that I reached out to when I moved to Chicago. So it's a very special time, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Candida, I'm really excited for this time in your career. You have two shows up right now in New York at El Museo del Barrio and at Gray. I just wanted to start with, how does it feel to have this homecoming in New York?
Wow. Well, thank you. And thank you to all who are in the audience today. I want to say that I was completely blown away. I didn't expect it to be so grand. I mean, you don't know what to expect, but the fact that it happened in a way where there were these two shows, happening a week apart, opening a week apart, was a wonderful opportunity to really share works from 48 years at a museo, and then to show very new work at Gray with in a sort of a collaboration with Bob Thompson. So it was quite amazing, and I'm so much gratitude. Thank you, stars, thank you, cosmos, whatever. I mean, there's something very amazing. You can't predict this. I mean, I'm still holding. I'm still. It gives me a really great opportunity to kind of get a really wider lens to sort of reflect, and see where the threads are, what could be picked up, what continues to resonate. It's a wonderful viewpoint. And I mean, it's a real gift. And I'm so grateful to all the people who were responsible for making it happen. So, and much gratitude.
And there's two very different shows. Like the El Museo show is a survey show over 50 years of your work. And the Gray show is really like new work responding to, of course, a very influential artist. But let's start with El Museo show, because in this exhibition, there's so much work that is relatively unknown to New York City audiences. And I wanted to start with an early drawing that you did in Fordham while you took Jack Whitten's class. So I wanted you to maybe talk about that experience, this work in particular, and I know that Jack was mentor to you, and just thinking about how he shaped the way you think about art.
Well, thank you for showing this. I discovered this little drawing sort of late in the process. It was kind of buried among other drawings. When I saw it, I was really delighted because it's so old, 1975. And I remember it took me all the way back to Fordham Lincoln Center in Jack's class where I was doing work like this. I only had little pads, and my pen and my little pencils. And so he allowed me to recognize the artist that I was becoming. And I am eternally grateful to him for that. There's nothing that you hear better than hearing it from somebody else in some ways, because being the artist was something brand new for me. I didn't know that's what this was. That this was what that I had this potential, right? And so this is the 70s, and he just said to me, Candida, if you make these really big, you can win awards and scholarships, and you should apply to Cooper Union. And I didn't really know Cooper Union. I didn't know that he was teaching there. If he was teaching there full time, he was teaching at Fordham part time. And so it was just a really generous gesture on his part to recognize these seeds that I had, and to speak to them, right? And so I really appreciate that, and I heard that very clearly. And I had to wait a few years before I proceeded. I never did apply to Cooper Union. I mailed out, I requested the huge, it was many pages of application, a lot of questions, and I was a little intimidated, so I didn't go there. But I actually found my way after graduation in 77 toward Museo del Barrio, which had classes, and there were catalogs and books I could look at. So it was the beginning of my journey, really.
So now that you mention El Museo, because I know through our conversations throughout the years, you do mention that you did take classes at El Museo, you took printmaking classes. We've spoken about how important printmaking has been. And I've always seen like a graphic quality to your paintings. That is perhaps something that people are unaware, that you have made a lot of prints throughout your career. So can you talk a little bit about your relationship to printmaking and those courses at El Museo?
Well, printmaking was something that I was made aware of by looking at the work of a lot of Puerto Rican artists who really were amazing printmakers, like Lorenzo Armad, for example, or Jose Rosa, or Rafael Tufino. Um, and I was in awe of them, really. And so while I was still a student at Fordham, there was another colleague there who actually knew Lorenzo Mal, and he actually shared with me his home info, his telephone, and I called him, and I actually went to visit him when I first went to Puerto Rico a few months later. And so I was a very shy young woman, so I didn't ask a lot of questions, but I looked at his studio, and he left me with he told me that I should read Arnold Hauser's book, the social history of art. And so I did. I got all those volumes, and it was really an amazing sort of connection. And but I love the way they detailed, there was something very dynamic about the print. And so slowly but surely, I edged my way towards, I went to Bob Blackburn's workshop. He was a very a big encourager. You know, you have to do this. And I was at the Studio Museum in Harlem in the 80s, and there was another artist there, Charles Burwell, who was also doing prints. And so it just, yeah, the sort of the energy around printmaking just got bigger and bigger. And so I think it's a beautiful form. I mean, I love that you can make multiples. I've made over the years several different prints, but I've never really shown them. I just kind of have them in my archives right now. Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit more about that visit to Puerto Rico? Because I know that you visited Lorenzo Mar's studio, and I'm wondering how that feels like as a Puerto Rican, born and raised in Brooklyn, what that visit meant for you and how that shaped how you were thinking about, your identity and somehow translating that into your work.
Yeah, well, I just felt it was new, right? Puerto Rico was as an island, as a place, was old and new. I had never been there before. So, but my parents were very clear when they were talking to us as kids, you are Puerto Ricans first. You're Americans second, you're Puerto Ricans first. And we were very entrenched in the culture, right? We spoke Spanish at home, right? We ate pateles, we helped with there was a big tradition, we had parties, we ate roast pork, the whole thing. So it was very clear who we were. And we lived in the projects in Brooklyn, and so the Farragut projects, and my grandparents actually lived in the Fort Greene projects. And so at first we all lived together, and then slowly we got the new apartment in Brooklyn. So and so what I want to say, it was humbling in a way, I mean Puerto Rico is a smaller island, but for me, it was a big thing. It was rich, and it was, it's just colorful, and people, were so friendly. And I couldn't stay a long time because I didn't really have a place to go to. We stayed in a hotel with two of my other girlfriends. And so we stayed for a few days. And I remember it was pretty dramatic landing back, because one of the engines, I don't know whether it was American, just kind of went up in flames. And so it was pretty dramatic coming back. But, over the course of many years, I started to take little trips over there. And ultimately, our parents did build a home in Villalba, where they're from. And so when I first got there, it was mostly San Juan, and I went to El Museo, Ponce, it was just really a really big learning experience también. But I was very grateful for that connection. And so, I mean, it's always been a part of our lives, right? I mean, the going back and forth to Puerto Rico, coming back. And so that traveling is, that airplane travel is just so significant. And now they also had routes to Ponce, which were not as popular, right? But, flying to San Juan, driving a car is always kind of, it's a little bit unnerving to me, because the route is so somewhat treacherous. So very small roads, but I love going. I love spending time there. I just wish I had more time to do that. And ultimately, my dream was always to have a studio there too. And my father ultimately, before he died, he actually created a space for where I could work. But when I used to go there to visit, I would work outside on his little table, and I used my mother's Bible as a reference, and made drawings. So it was like a couple of days and weeks of just being in it, right? And being up in the mountains, right, where I didn't really go to the city, and it was quite beautiful.
I want to go back to the slide where the painting So I Am Boricua is pictured, because I think that painting has a lot of the seeds for, a lot of your thinking and really both figurative and abstract elements. Can you walk us through your thinking behind this painting?
Okay, let me turn the clock. It was at this moment, I think this was part of the show that I had at June Kelly Gallery. I was building paintings in parts. And I was also collaging elements. So here you see several elements. You see the drawn portrait. And there's this a pattern below that's also sort of I used mediums to kind of hold everything together. So it was sort of a multiple approach, but I love this idea of stacking paintings. It felt very architectural to me. It felt, like you see those three little kind of squares on the side. Uh, and I just, the portrait itself, that little portrait came later. I started building up this atmosphere, it was sort of a space that I was creating within the painting. I didn't know how it was going to complete itself, but it felt more complete when I actually nailed that little portrait in there. The portrait was not meant to be a self-portrait, but it kind of looks like that in a way. um, and it was I created the painting, I looked at it for a while, and then it took a few more days to think about the title. And so at that moment, claiming who you were was really important in New York. It was like Boricua versus soy Puerto Rican, Boricua felt more real, more genuine somehow. And so it was a declarative action. The titling became very, very important. And usually my titles are very sort of poetic, and they sort of take in something bigger because they're not trying to be so, they're not trying to direct the painting in any one particular place. It's meant to be much more open, like poetry, right? So I think it was a very declarative moment. I love to dance. I love salsa. I love, it was just a really important time in my life. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that is a great segue to the 90s, because I think that's a very important and formative decade for you. You pursued your MFA at Yale from 95 to 97. And the title of the show El Museo, Circle Point Hoop, is taken from a work from this period in 1996. So can you talk about this work and why it was important for you to highlight it through the title of the exhibition?
Sure. Let's see. I want to say that there was this moment when I got to Yale. Well, my son was born in 91, so he was still really little. And it was really important to me. I wanted to really be in this conversation that was not that familiar to me, right? To be outside of the studio, but to be in a new studio that was more public with other people looking and criticizing and asking you, like Mr. Mel Bachner, who was very influential in the department and in my own sort of working world, studio world. And he would always ask the question, what is your intention? And I remember thinking about that a lot and thinking, well, what can I do that's different? Like, what can I do that really represents something tangible and something that I feel I can construct, meaning from, and it doesn't have to be literal, right? And so I just, there's a piece that's not in the show that is called Intention, that is a lavender colored, smaller rectangular piece that has these rows of nails. And actually, what I started to do was really listen to my mother and father to sort of remember some of the things that they would do. And for example, and it might seem weird to other people, but for me, it was kind of a normal thing. My mother would just say, dame un número, right? Because she was sort of getting this feeling that somebody was trying to connect to her. And so if she said to me, dame un número, I knew instinctively that it was a number from 1 to 26, which was the numbers in the alphabet. And so I would say, cinco, 5. And that would be A, B, C, D, E, right? E. So the letter E. So then she would say, oh, Elizabeth, whoever else she might think of that might be trying to get in touch with her, right? It wasn't like she used the phone a lot, but this was like a way of sort of phoning into people, like sort of being connected. So I thought that was really special. And then my father would also toss pennies in the air for good luck. He would constantly toss money. And I love that idea metaphorically, you know, how a penny can track space, right? So, I mean, I kind of stretched these experiences into something more conceptual because I needed beginning points that I could really embed into the practice. And so, because I wanted it to look different, you know, I didn't want it to look just like a figure painting, but I wanted to take something, you know, really concrete and sort of mash it up and turn it into something that was surprising to me. And so, you know, thinking of, you know, Leonardo da Vinci's, you know, and the Vesuvius Man, and sort of taking that as a shape, but then, you know, counting out like this word extension, counting it out in terms of its, you know, alphabet formation, you know, positions, you know, so it sounds kind of weird, but I had this mathematical formula going on. And so that it would look like something like this, right? And so the circle, you know, was always there, you know, from the penny to, you know, to masking tape, you know, to, you know, going round and round like a merry-go-round when you were a kid and you just fall into the ground because you collapse from a kind of dizzy spell, right? And so I think, you know, playing the game of, you know, dominoes or playing the game of boxes, right? I was always looking for connections and things that kept reappearing. And so that's how my formal language was created in the 90s. And so the big black piece that you see there was a big event for me. And you showed earlier the drawings that I was working from, but I was doing a lot of work on the walls by the time I graduated in those late 90s. And I love working on the wall, and I could do all kinds of things. You know, I nailed into the wall. I used flash paint. I learned about flash paint from Mel Bachner because his father was a sign painter, and that's how he learned about flash paint. And so that and he was also having this really big show at Yale, at the Yale Art Gallery when I just started at Yale. And so it was a show that was traveling, right? Language is Transparent, I believe was the title of the show. And it was extraordinary. I had never seen, you know, big rooms filled with a plant and, you know, a sort of a measure, right? I mean, it was just really a different kind of viewing experience for me, right? To be in his work. And so I got a lot from him, right? I mean, I really did and so I like the economy. Like I love sort of breaking something down to this sort of beginning point, right? But making it look kind of beautiful, right? And discreet almost, right? So flash was beautiful. Black flash is particularly beautiful because it just kind of creates like this space, you know. It looks like it's going deep into the space. It's velvety, it's rich. And so in my final show that was in the Yale, we had this kind of Yale mini gallery. I think it was part of the pit, right, where all the critiques happened. And we had to break the class down into groups. So I was in like group 5 or something. So there was maybe 3 or 4 of us showing at once. And so I was able to do this big wall painting. You know, it was my dream to work really big. And then I started to, you know, put those nails in. I used 3 pounds more or less of roofing nails. And I love the color that they reflected because they're aluminum. They reflect all the color in the room, and so they become sparkly, you know, and beautiful. And then I just made believe I was playing a game of boxes, you know, and I used chalk and just started to connect the dots to kind of infer that there was something alive happening, like there was something still going on, right? The game hadn't ended because there was no no boxes that were claimed, right, with a letter. And that's how the game of boxes was won, right? It was like, how many boxes can you get closed? How many boxes can you close? And so it was an open game. And so it meant that there were still people in the room, right? And so that idea that this minimal gesture, right, could feel like it was bigger than what you were seeing, for me, was very generative. And so, and all the other paintings in the room, all the titles were kind of spelled out with the nails. And so they were dealing with all the language, the new words that were coming into my hearing and to my process as the artist, right? What about convention? What's about intentionality, right? How do you break apart conventions of making, right? To get it closer to what you need as the artist, right? And how do you determine what that is? So really learning about process and how important it was to me as the artist was vitally important during this period. The glass graters was an element that was very important at the home, for cooking, especially for cooking pasteles, which those of you who know pasteles, they take a long time. In the good old days, we didn't have blenders. We just had those graters, and my mother would grate those pasteles. And so we all had a role to play. And so, the material in making pasteles and making this food rich with so much, so many it feels like centuries old, right? I mean, it's just like we grew up eating this. And the string that was used to wrap the patele, the paper that was folded, it all had an impact on me. And the more I look at it, they were squares. They were the prepackaged squares, and my mother's string. I mean, I've used that string in the work as well. And so so this whole room was really fabulous to recreate. And I just want to thank the curators for pushing me there, because I was like, recreate, wish me luck, And so it was just, I never thought I wanted to recreate anything. So, but it was just really important to kind of to re-witness something, how to re-witness the process unfolding or disentangling, so that in many ways, you start to really it just becomes more black and white, how the process regenerated itself over time. And so I'm so grateful for the courage that I got from very early on, to really be the artist that I always wanted to be. And it didn't matter it didn't matter about anybody else. I wasn't in the marketplace, so I didn't have to worry about anything. I just did what I wanted to do. And I think that's what I get from this exhibition. Like, thank goodness, I just follow what I wanted to do. I just do it, I'm still on adventure. I'm still following what I want to do, what the work wants. I let the work talk to me too. So, I mean, the paintings have a big role in all of it. So, and so there on the side there, you see those drawings, which I still want to recreate in a very large scale. I was very friendly at this point with Solar Wit, and he was such a humble human being. I mean, so many people liked him, and he liked so many other people. He was just so kind. And we talked a lot about this, and I always wanted to be like him. I just wanted to do big paintings on the wall with, I can give you a little note. This is how you do it. But I didn't have the support for that, right? So I had to kind of, I couldn't really continue doing this work. I didn't have the space to continue this work on a larger scale. But seeing this now, I feel like I want to do it big. I want to still do these pieces, the way I've always dreamed them to be. So thank you for taking me there.
I mean, I have to say, every time I speak with you, I discover new aspects of your work, and seeing these works from your time at Yale really connects to the way in which you think about painting, that is very conceptual. And I've heard you describe yourself as a conceptual painter. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that methodology, because there's so many references in your work. There's references from art history, the history of painting, there's memories, there's personal stories. There are works that reference your mother. Yesterday was Mother's Day, and we had a little chat in the morning. And I was just thinking about how much of that personal history is in your work. There's works that reference your son. So can you talk a bit about, how these concepts, how this conceptual methodology translates into your work, and what does extraction as a visual language communicate to you that figuration just does not? And why do you choose abstraction?
It chose me, but no, I think the language around painting and making is so I just it drives me nuts sometimes. Uh but I get it, you know. I really I still feel, I mean, it's kind of hard to say I'm a conceptual. I'm not truly a conceptual artist, but I would say that perceptually I tend to be more conceptual. Like if there's something conceptually perceptual, you know, I mean, that makes more sense. Um, um, I think that everything has a beginning point, right? We learn how to look at the body. We learn to look at fruit, you know, and so that's how we teach observation, right? And so, or how to draw the egg, right? That's, you know, there's light and shadow. So really looking at something is critically important as the artist, you know? And so I love really looking at things. And so, and then not just looking at them, but I like to figure out how they came to be, like how were they put together, right? So it goes from the outside to the inside, right? So those threads for me are so important in the way I process, right? I just don't stop at, oh, there's the egg, right? Okay, let's crack the egg and see what happens. Or let's boil the egg. You know what I mean? Like you want to go deeper, and I want to share that too. So when I create these paintings, I kind of step into these, it's, how would I describe this? It's like climbing through a terrain. Like you're going through a terrain, but you're not really sure what you're going to need. So you wear comfortable shoes, you know, so at least, you know, if you fall, you're not gonna break anything. But I think there's something about, it's like when you learn how to dance, you know, or like I love dancing mambo or cha-cha-cha, right? But there are like steps to mambo and cha-cha-cha, right? You have to get the principal step so you don't step all over your partner's feet, right? And so, but once you know that, then you can be really flirtatious and you can whirl around as much as you want, right? And you can riff off of that, but you have to kind of know the rules, right? So, you know, with painting, you know, I mean, there are really strict rules too, right? You can't just, you know, put oil, you know, on top of acrylic, you know, or, you know what I mean? Or acrylic over oils, right? I mean, there's like these things, or if you do, you can do it, but you can't do it. You have to do it, you know, systematically. So, or you can put them side by side, you know, but okay, so I'm kind of riffing a little bit more, but I think boxes are not always good. Labels are not always good. So I think that artists have to go wherever they need to go. And sometimes there's no language for it. So you just have to kind of invent it. And I think that it takes courage to be the artist, right? I mean, it's not the pathway is not always clear, you know. And so I know that I love color. So anything that has color in it, I'm there, right? So I think that and color lives everywhere. It is in our food, it's in the clothes we wear, it's who we are, everything. So um so yeah, I'm not sure if I'm
No,
getting
you're doing it. I want to turn into the slide before this one had the painting Mary in the Sky with Diamonds from 2005. So maybe we can focus on that and talk about how you arrive to these colors and these shapes. I know it's a reference to your mother-in-law. Is that correct?
well, the title was.
The title is. So
The
can you,
title was, but it has nothing to do with my mother-in-law except for the title when she passed. And I needed a title for the painting and she passed. And when we put her in the coffin, she used to wear this beautiful fake diamond bracelet. the day, I mean, I had just finished this painting, and the day that she was buried, after she was buried, I came up with the title because we decided, the funeral home asked us, did you want to take the bracelet off or not? And we said, no, keep the bracelet on. So marrying this guy with diamonds refers to that, so it's a way for me to remember her. She was very special to me. But the painting is made up of from different places. Actually, I used to teach at the Barron School of Art in Ireland. And so there were a lot of wishing wells, and the landscape was beautiful, so there were a lot of like these stony fences or these walls everywhere. So this painting was arrived at through drawings of that time, of this. I used to look at the New York Times. I loved, all the color, the marketplace. They had special sections like the marketplace. I forget exactly what it was called, but so they would travel around the globe, and there was this beautiful man. I think he was from Sri Lanka, and he was in front of a marketplace. So the sort of the compositional beginning point was started there, right? And so I will use photography, I will use bits and pieces of different things to kind of bring together this painting. So this painting comes with multiple sources, beginning points. And then once the paint goes down, then it becomes the painting, right? And so the painting holds it all together and pushes everything back, right? And so color always has the foothold, right? It's always the thing is going to make everything work for me, so it's like what I push, what I take, what I pull away. And so that painting is very special to me because it has all those different entry points of history, right, for me. And so but to go back to your question about abstraction, I just want to say something that is, I think there's something about the notion of an abstraction, which I feel is more real than not, which is that mashup between things that we know and things we don't know. And so for me, it's more about what lives or resonates, that feeds me and lingers through the way I come to the color as an alchemy almost. So the color for me is very expansive. I feel like it becomes like air, and it has its own vibrations. And so I feel that gives me a lot of comfort because it helps to bring all this knowledge that I know, but at the same time, it liberates it into this unknown. So I always need mystery. Like when I begin, I don't know what it's going to look like at the end, quote unquote, right? And so paintings for me never really end though, because the color lives. And I think that's why I love it so much, right? And color moves and changes depending on where it is in the room, or if it's, the lighting, right? Changes the reading. The photograph changes the reading. But when you're in it, in front of it, it is totally yours.
It almost feels like you're having a dialogue with the work while you're making it, like
Always.
telling you what to do next.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
I wanted to shift a bit to the work Estoy Bien that is included in the show, because there's a whole series of air paintings that you started. And I wanted you to talk about how these paintings came about, because from what I understand, it came about through a public art project, and that changed a direction for some of your work. So can you talk a bit about how these paintings started and that particular public project?
Sure. Let's see. In 2017, we had Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. It was a very big year for me because in January I was doing a fashion show with Comme des Garçons in Paris. A few months later, my father dies, and then a few months after that, Hurricane Maria happens. And before all of that, after the Paris show, I came back and I was commissioned by the city of Chicago to do this piece under Wacker Drive. And this, this section, this area right now faces the Apple Store, right, on Wacker Drive. It's a very beautiful vantage point. And I've never done anything like that. This was like, really long, 200 feet across, 17 feet high. It's just huge. And so we had to work with banner material. And Chicago has you always notice a lot of the banners, right? They use a lot of banners to advertise, like the Cultural Center has banners all around the building. And so I worked with this new material I didn't know much about. And I decided the way that I would begin this project or to think about it, and a piece that I could make was to go into my archives. So I went through my archives and I started to source different images, and then I started to work with what I call my digital paintbrush, Eileen Mueller, who I love, and helped me to sort of tie all this together into a new thing, right? So that's the beginning. And so then we had to get them printed to check for the color, right? And the extraordinary thing about this too is that for the engineers had to really work on there's a weave in here, right? It's like a screen. And they had to work so that the little window was big enough so that the bridge would not fall down, right? So the air current through it had to be clean, right? It had to come through. And that was fascinating to me, the whole idea that there was wind, this idea of wind going through it, I love that idea, the third thing, it's like, yeah, it's not just two-dimensional, but there's wind that activates through it, right? There's something else that you don't really notice in the work. So I got really excited about this, and I saw this was one of the first samples that I got back. So there were proofs. That's what they call them, proofs. And so I had all these proofs lying around, and then I asked if I could take them, and they gave them to me. And then the Hurricane Maria happened, and these were all rolled up in my studio. I had a beautiful studio at Manor Contemporary in Chicago, and I had enough room to roll these out and look at them. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had all these paints that I'd never really used, these water-based enamels and other things that I could just pour. And I had lots of plastic, like drop cloths. And I just started to play around. And it helped me to occupy my mind with something other than trying to find my mother and sister, right? Because at this moment, we had everybody trying to figure out where our families were, and everybody was constantly on Facebook, and we were stressed out, right? And there was no telephone service. My mother, who's already in her 90s, and my sister, who was there with my mother. We were horrified. We didn't know how to think about this. So I just started working because it was a way to ease my mind. And I was just working on the floor, and then I was working on the wall. And, it was just something that I was just doing, right? And I wasn't being overly critical about it, but I was enjoying it, right? It was helping me to just stay in my focus, in my peace, inner peace. And then months passed, and then I kept thinking, wow, I really love this double-sidedness. I've never been able to do a painting that was not just on the wall, right? But it was almost like a painting with two little feet, right? Or like big easels, like chalkboards. So it took many months of trying to figure out what this framing would look like, right? And and then, Dan Sullivan, who is partner to Edra Soto, is really good with all these things. And so he really helped me to streamline the design, and so we can hold these pieces up. So that was a big deal, right? I love this idea that I could see through it, that I could see both sides, that it could breathe, and that it could hang, just hang on its own terms. And so I wasn't sure if anybody would ever be interested in it. And sure enough, Monique was very interested in having a show of these works. And it was the first time that I showed at her gallery. It's just, was that the first? Was that the first? Yeah, that was the first show, I think. it was the first show I've ever hung where there was just an installation right through it was down the middle of the gallery. And the only works on the wall were like 4 or 5 collages that I had done based on photographs that my sister sent me. Right. And that was it. It was it was just kind of cool to have a show that did not use the walls. And that you could move around and you could see through. I love this idea of being able to see through and sort of, it was almost like a kaleidoscope of color. And I still want to work with this in the future. I just, I haven't had the opportunity, but I'm not done with this yet. But I still, it's parked for now. Yeah.
I just want to remind folks in the Zoom room that we are going to shift to the Q&A in about a little over 10 minutes. But before we do that, I would like to talk about the show at Gray because this is all new work and we haven't spoken about it. And I think it's such a fascinating show in the sense that you're responding to Bob Thompson's work. It's a very colorful, obviously, both of you are very colorful painters. Can you talk about how this show came about and the process of making these new works in conversation with Thompson?
Sure. Several months ago, almost over a year, Anastasia from the gallery and Raven, I mean, they were always wanting to do something, and they have been hosting these shows where they ask 2 artists to collaborate. And so I had a Thompson's painting invite up on the wall. And it was, I've been looking at his work for a long time. I first learned about his work in the 90s while I was a student at Yale. And it was actually from a woman, Judith Wilson, who was getting her doctorate. And she's a brilliant scholar, and she was writing her thesis on Bob Thompson, and she shared it with us, and I was just wow, I was just blown away. Somebody working with biblical themes, but using, the primal colors, right? Like it was just beautiful. And I could never let go of it, right? It was just so, and you don't really, I didn't see a lot of his work. It took a long time. It was probably when the Smart Show, brought his show to Chicago, where we actually saw really big canvases, because normally I would see them in art fairs and they would be tiny, little tiny ones. And so I loved his scale. I mean, he worked from very tiny to very big canvases. And so when I was asked to do a show with him and to be in conversation with him, I hesitated at first. I was like, oh my goodness. But then I was really into it. And I love, the sourcing. He would look at Poussin, he would look at Cezanne, he looked at so many other artists that I also love. And then to have to be able to look at his work as a beginning point was just really just something that I truly enjoyed. And I'm still continuing. I'm not done yet. I mean, it's done for this show, but I have other ones that I'm still working on. But I just love like his use of the primary, color. And for me, it was not something that I go to right away. And so it forced me to like really brighten my palette. And I just love taking bits and pieces of information, and sort of compiling that into a bigger composition. It's just the way I work anyway, normally. So I loved every minute of it, actually. And I'm just thrilled, and so humbled to be in the same room with him, actually. And he died very young, so I wonder what his work would look like now. And there are instances in his work where you can start to feel how the shapes just kind of jam up and they start to like spread out and they become unrecognizable, right? So you start to see these hints at a kind of abstraction. And and there's so much symbolism in his work, and it's just, I'm always looking. When I look, I always find something else. His work keeps giving. And so I just truly humbled to be in the same room with him.
Do you think this experience will shift the way you approach color and composition moving forward?
No, I mean, I think my compositions, I think my color does shift, depending on my mood and where I am. Like if I was painting in Rome or I was painting, there was something, I'm very attuned to the sense of place, right? I'm very present where I am. And so I find that I want to communicate that through the paintings, right? So whatever the source material is, it's always a combination of source materials, or, whether it's the light of the day, right? Or, it's the food that I'm eating. There's always something that comes in, and I'm very sensitive to it. It's just something that I just love to do, and I don't question it. It just kind of happens. So I would say that the paintings are still happening, right? So I mean, what they're going to look like, who knows? They're just going to keep happening.
That reminds me, you've spoken a lot about how, stained glass windows like have been a important reference for you, and thinking about your work and these paintings as like a window into your life and your personal experiences. And I have one final question before we move on to the Q&A. It's like, as have seen like the breadth of your practice, like over 50 years at El Museo. And I'm sure that has been an incredible experience for you to see how your work has shifted and all the different approaches that you have taken throughout the years. Have you, how have you feel like your artistic approach has evolved over the years, and what has remained consistent in the way that you approach your work?
Wow, that's a big question. Um, I think I will remain insistent and persistent in my search as the artist. I think that I've gained so much courage in this process that I'm not going to let up anytime soon. I am not afraid to jump into something unfamiliar and sort of struggle with it until it just feels right. And so I think the commitment that I have has only deepened. I think in terms of how I declare my intentionality publicly has only become more persistent. And I'm not as shy as I used to be. I've taught many years. Questions in the studio are really important. Persistence is important. The curiosity is endlessly important. I don't want to be predictable. I've always been more on the experimental side, in the sense that I'm always open to new discoveries. And so I'm still walking with my eyes wide open, and my mind, just fertile. And as I grow, as I get older in this, I just feel more assured that this is what I was supposed to be doing all along.
Well, thank you so much, Candida. And I admire always your energy and your tireless working ethic. And feel really lucky to call you a personal friend. So now I will hand it over to Chloe, who is going to moderate the Q&A for us.
Thank you so much, Carla and Candida. That was such a beautiful conversation. We have several audience questions already, and if you have a question for Candida and Carla that you would like to ask, there's a form in the chat where you can submit your question. The first question is going to be from Elle. Elle, I'll give you the mic to ask your question.
Hi, I'm curious, when you look back at the arc of your career, if you can pinpoint to one thing that you've learned about yourself that has informed or given insight into your process the most. I know you've spoken about many different qualities, but if there's one standout that really speaks to you.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about that painting that is at the beginning at a museo, which is called She Went Round and Round, where I'm sort of in my high school uniform. There's a little dog sort of in the foreground. I was really looking at Seurat and the Impressionist, and I was really trying to mimic that. That sort of that pointy feeling, but it was very textured. And I was thinking about that because at that moment, when you learn, you can go round and round and spin, and then you can fall down and you're dizzy and you don't really know where you are. Like, I love that feeling, right? And I would say that sometimes that feeling still comes with me in different ways. And so it's like it's it's that space that you can't name and you're in that dizzy space. But I think going back to this idea of abstraction, right? And like this idea of letting go of something. So I feel like that was a turning point, like looking at that painting and realizing that I was trying to say something, like the dog. I learned a lot in studying pre-Columbian art that the dog sort of carried the soul of dead people, across, the, and so dogs became very symbolic, but I also had a pet dog and her name was Gigi. And so I love the idea that dogs do reappear in my work too. And so yeah, there's something about how a painting can hold so much information, yeah, and yet still be a really beautiful object, right? So you don't need to know all of that, but if I can keep, my job as the artist is to keep you there, to keep your eyeballs there so that you will linger, right? So we learn all these formal tricks and things, to make sure that the composition is good enough and strong enough so that you will linger, right? So I hope that helps to answer.
Thank you so much for that question, Elle, and thank you for that answer, Candida. The next question is from GE. GE is wondering, do you feel your art shares elements of mysticism with the revolutionary, that it's compelled to surf the refracted echo of conviction, a conviction that's transcendent? Thank you.
Wow, those are really big words, and I don't think about it that way because I feel like I want to be grounded. My feet are on the ground, and that's where I like to be. And so I think whatever else comes out through the process is what happens because of the process. But I don't aim for anything other than to be present in the room with the painting.
I love that answer. Thank you, Candida. The next question is from Charlie. Charlie, I'll pass you the mic.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Carla and Candida. It was such a wonderful, inspiring conversation. Candida, you spoke a lot about your processes and the sense of serendipity that takes place when you're working. And I was just curious to hear you speak about your sense of intuition. And I wonder if it's something that you've had to work with to develop, if there's moments where you've had a sense of trust with it or a sense of distrust with it, and really kind of how you learned to, if you had to learn to develop it, but really how it really works for you as you go through your practice.
It's a great question. Intuition is something that you learn. And I think for me, I listen to it. Like I learned to listen to it. I learned to listen to my parents, right? And so I guess I heard it first and then I trusted it later, right? I learned to use it. So I learned that I can turn it into something formal, right? Like as a part of my process. So, but I think you absolutely need it because as artists, no matter what role that takes, if you're a writer, if you're an architect, right? You have to trust something that's not made yet, right? So I think that we can talk about the instinct, right, as something that is the material that we all need, and that's the mystery. Maybe that's a really good word for mystery.
Thank you for that question, Charlie, and thank you for that answer, Candida. The next question is from Monique-Meloche, who I know you know well. Monique is wondering if you can talk about painting in the round.
Painting in the round. Do you mean like a circular painting?
Yeah, so can you talk about painting in the round, i.e. there's no top or bottom until the final day?
Well, that sounds like infinity to me. So it is my dot. It's the end point. Like it could be the end of the sentence, but it could also be the dot that begins the game. It is also the sun. It could also be, my head. It could also, yeah, I just think it is infinity. And so what goes around comes around, as they say. And so maybe it is a really beautiful symbol for life itself. And I love that the sun and the moon feel like they're circles. And maybe they really are not close up, right? They're more like this atmosphere that's just kind of holding time. Um, so I would say that for me, and now Monique, you're sort of making me remember perhaps one of the first paintings I ever laid eyes on, which was the painting that was circular in nature, and it was on my mother's Bible, La Sagrada Biblia, and that painting goes back to Raphael, and it has been retranslated into the Madonna of the Chair. And it's a very famous painting. And so I would have to say that was a very big beginning point for me. So, but I don't usually paint in the round. Although I'm beginning to, it comes up, it's been coming up. I did my first fresco in the round, and that's in Maine. But painting in the round is yeah, it's something I haven't really done a lot of, but I feel like I'm very aware of of how that circle, expands. And so thank you for the question, that tricky question, Monique.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you for that answer, Candida. I'll ask the last question. Candida, I really liked that part of the conversation where you said that your paintings never really end because the color lives. And I'm wondering, in looking back at all this work, if there were any periods of time that you felt picking up the idea again would be useful for you at this stage.
You mean in terms of the exhibition and kind
Yeah.
of,
Like
yeah.
looking back at these old strands of thought, like were there any that you wanted to pick back up?
Yeah, the big black rectangle. I just want to make it bigger, and I want to do all the drawings that are in those frames. I want to make them all big, monster paintings. Yeah, on the wall. Yeah, yeah. That's one big thread that I want to continue. Yeah,
I can't wait to see them.
me too.
Thank you so much, Candida. Thank you, Carla. This conversation has been such an honor and pleasure to listen to. And I know we're going to conclude today with a poem. And so I want to give Carla a chance to introduce it, and then Candida will read it. And I'm going to post the English translation of the poem in the chat for those of you who would like to read along in English.
Thank you, Chloe. So Candida will read Yo misma fui mi ruta by Julia de Burgos, who's the poet that introduced me to poetry when I was a young girl in San Juan. And as we were speaking yesterday and trying to come up and think about which poem to include and to really speak of, that came up as something that I think that parts of what the poem is about we share as women as we navigate the world, the art world, and this moment in time. So I will now hand it over to Candida to read.
Thank you. I had to put my reading glasses on. I'm going to do my best. I have never read publicly in Spanish, and so I'm very proud to be vulnerable here now. The title is Yo misma fui mi ruta. Yo quise ser como los hombres quisieron que yo fuese un intento de vida, un juego al escondite con mi ser. Pero yo estaba hecha de presentes y mis pies planos sobre la tierra promisora no resistían caminar hacia atrás y seguían adelante, adelante, pulando las cenizas para alcanzar el beso de los senderos nuevos. A cada paso adelantado en mi ruta, hacia el frente rascaba mis espaldas. El aleteo desesperado de los troncos viejos. Pero la rama estaba desprendida para siempre, y a cada nuevo azote la mirada mía se separaba más y más y más de los lejanos horizontes aprendidos, y mis rostros iba tomando la expresión que la venía de dentro. La expresión definida que asomaba un sentimiento de liberación íntima, un sentimiento que surgía del equilibrio sostenido entre mi vida y la verdad del beso de los senderos nuevos. Ya definido mi rumbo en el presente, me sentí brote de todos los suelos de la tierra, de los suelos sin historia, de los suelos sin porvenir, del suelo siempre suelo, sin orillas, de todos los hombres y de todas las épocas. Yo fui todo en mí, como fui en mí la vida. Yo quise ser como los hombres quisieron que yo fuese. Un intento de vida, un juego al escondite con mi ser. Pero yo estaba hecha de presentes cuando ya los heraldos me anunciaban en el regio desfile de los troncos viejos. Se me torció el deseo de seguir a los hombres y el homenaje se quedó esperándome. Gracias.
Oh, Candida, that was amazing. Thank you so, so much for concluding today with that poem by Julia de Burgos. And thank you, Carla, for that introduction. Thank you so much, Candida and Carla, for the conversation today. I would especially also like to thank the team at El Museo del Barrio who were so, so helpful in preparing for today, especially Zuna, Alexia, Susanna, and Pamela. And thank you to Irini at Sutton Combs, and thank you to Allison at Gray, New York as well for their support. And thank you to Sarah, who supports Candida in the studio as well. I'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our new social environment program and making daily conversations possible, and for their support of our archive, where you'll be able to watch this shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports us, our staff, our writers, our operations. You can support our work at the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at a special time of 4 p.m., join us for a conversation with Kung Sung Lee and Amy Kung on the occasion of Body of Memory at Alexander Gray Associates in New York. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being here today. And thank you again, Candida and Carla.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you
so much.
Candida.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
everybody.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
thanks.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, Candida.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rail. Thank you, Carla, for all the great questions. Thank you, all my peeps out there. Love
Thank
you.
Congrats from Hyde Park.
Amazing.
Yes. Hey, hey.
Gracias. Hey, buddy.